Today you become an ancient Egyptian tomb robber of the Valley of the Kings. I was born in the workman's village on the west bank of Thebes, where I was meant to carve tombs for the pharaohs. Yet with those same hands I pried open the gold of the dead. I was born in the workman's village on the west bank of the Nile at Thebes, where every household carved tombs for the pharaohs, and my father was the most renowned stonemason in the village. The night my mother bore me, a hot wind blew across the west bank, and she wrapped me in a length of linen my father had earned carving tombs, praying to Osiris, Lord of the dead, that I would grow up safe. When I was for the pharaoh's granaries could issue no rations, the tomb-carving masons of the village were idle, and our whole family lived a season on sand-mixed dry bread. When I was 7, I first walked into the Valley of the Kings with my father and watched him carve the pharaoh's name stroke by stroke deep into the cold stone wall by lamplight. My father pointed at the dark tomb corridor and told me that every hidden door and trap was made to keep out tomb robbers, never knowing that one day all of it would become my livelihood. When I was 8, an old mason named Nefer came to the village, and seeing how quickly I memorized the layout of the corridors, he took me on as his young apprentice in stone. In the first years learning to carve tombs under Nefer, each dawn I climbed the west bank cliff path to cut new tombs, until I knew every hidden door, pit, and mechanism of a tomb by heart. When I was 13, I learned to tell which slab of a corridor wall was hollow, knowing from a single knock, and its echo on which side of the stone a secret chamber lay hidden. When I was 15, tomb robberies struck the Valley of the Kings again and again. The village lived in fear, and the patrolling soldiers dragged suspicious masons one by one to the temple for questioning. When I was 17, Nefer, cutting a new tomb, had his leg crushed by a falling block of stone, and from then on he could carve no more, and our whole family lost its bread. To buy medicine for Nefer and feed the household, on a moonless night I first thought of robbing a tomb, and alone in the dark I climbed up to the paupers' graves of the West Bank. That night, I pried open the tomb of a minor clerk and found only a few bronze amulets and a string of faience beads, yet the grain they bought saved Nefer's life. When I was 19, Nefer, on his deathbed, handed me an old papyrus drawn with the corridors of the Valley of the Kings, saying it was the whole inheritance of his lifetime of carving tombs. I hid that papyrus close against my waist, and from then on by day I carved stone to scrape a living, and by night I scouted the great tombs of the valley one by one against the map. When I was 21, I gathered 3 masons of my own village, and for the first time slipped into a great noble's tomb, following the map past the trap straight to the main coffin chamber. The moment I pried open the coffin, the torchlight blazed over a room of gold, golden masks, amulets, and painted wooden chests heaped across the floor, more gold than I had seen in all my life. We melted the gold into broken pieces and passed them to a fence goldsmith in the East Bank market, and overnight I went from a poor stonecutter to a man of wealth on the West Bank. With that gold, I built the grandest whitewashed villa on the West Bank, married the daughter of a River Temple musician, and bought a cow and 2 serving slaves. When I was 23, I grew ever bolder, and following Nefer's old map, I slipped into a long-abandoned pharaoh's tomb and made straight for the golden coffin deep within. The pharaoh's coffin had 3 nested layers, and the innermost was a man-shaped sarcophagus of solid gold inlaid with lapis lazuli and carnelian, so bright I could scarcely open my eyes. From the layered wrappings of the pharaoh's mummy, I drew out jeweled amulets and a golden scarab, and I swept away a whole box of lapis bead strings buried as offerings. After that haul, I became the undisputed chief of the West Bank robbers, and even the East Bank goldsmith would first offer me a cup of date wine with a fawning smile. When I was 25, I hired a band of porters, and over 3 years I plundered more than a dozen great tombs of the Valley of the Kings, until no one on the West Bank had more gold than I. I held lavish feasts by the bank of the Nile, musicians playing reed flute and harp, and I believed I would never again return to the days of gnawing dry bread. When I was 26, the unending robberies of the Valley of the Kings alarmed the city of Thebes, and the mayor in charge of the West Bank reported the case to the office of the vizier. The vizier ordered a royal tribunal to investigate the robberies, and when several plundered pharaohs' tombs were opened, the empty coffins within sent every priest present to his knees. The tribunal searched the workmen's village house by house, and every mason found with gold he could not account for was dragged to a side hall of the temple and harshly questioned. By night, I buried the gold of my villa in the sandy soil of a date palm grove, and I burned the papyrus map of the corridors that Nefer had left me to protect myself. I acted as though nothing had happened and went on carving stone, yet each day I watched the tribunal's officers pass the village gate, and my back ran cold with sweat. The tribunal seized the East Bank goldsmith who had melted my gold, and unable to bear the torture, he confessed in full how he had fenced my stolen treasure. The officers broke down my door at midnight and ransacked every room, but found no gold, and only recorded my name and my accomplices' names in the files of the tribunal. I was hauled before the tribunal of the vizier, made to kneel between two rows of priests, and forced to account for every tomb I had plundered and every piece of gold I had taken. I held to my denial and swore I was a clean stonemason, and the vizier with a cold sneer waved his hand and had the officers throw me into the temple dungeon to await trial. The dungeon was cold and black, and as I heard my accomplice tortured in the next cell, I understood for the first time that the curse my father had carved into the stone was no empty word. When I was 30, the porter foreman among my accomplices broke under torture and pointed the officers to the palm grove where I had hidden my gold, and in one night every piece was dug out. The recovered gold was heaped before the tribunal, every piece matching a plundered pharaoh's tomb, and the vizier declared in open court that my crime of robbing the royal tombs was beyond pardon. The sentence was to impale me before the crowd, and on the eve of execution the guard took my wife's last gold bracelet and quietly left the wooden cell door ajar a crack. Under cover of night, I squeezed out through the gap, crawling west along the Nile reeds, and left my villa, my wife, and the gold of half my life behind me. I hid in the western desert, sheltering in rock crevices by day to evade the patrolling officers, and only by night did I dare creep step by step toward the distant oasis. There was no water and no food in the desert. I gnawed on dried carrion birds. My lips split and bled, and only then did I learn the gold I had stolen could not buy a single mouthful of water. On the seventh day, I collapsed at the edge of an oasis and was saved by a caravan of desert traders heading south, who pulled me back from the gates of death with clean water and bread. I followed the caravan to a small town in Upper Egypt under a new name, claiming to be a mason of middling skill, scraping a living carving grinding mills for others. When I was 50, an old man with a Theban accent came to the town, recognized the old scar on the back of my hand from carving tombs, and stared at me for a long while. The old man did not denounce me, saying only that he too was a mason who had fled in those days, and urging me while I still lived to burn an offering of incense at the river temple to atone to the dead pharaohs. Carrying all my guilt, I walked into the river temple and knelt the whole night before the statue of Osiris, praying that the pharaoh's souls I had disturbed would spare my next life. In my old age, I carved cheap stone coffins for the poor of the town, taking not a coin, and the neighbors said this old mason had a fine hand and a kind heart, and none of them knew my past. On my deathbed, I drew the golden scarab I had taken from the pharaoh's mummy out from a crack in the wall, and bade my apprentice carry it back to the sands of the Valley of the Kings. My apprentice returned and said he had buried the scarab back in the Valley of the Kings, and that night I gazed at the mountains of the West Bank and closed my eyes, still clutching my father's old chisel in my hand. This is the life of an ancient Egyptian tomb robber of the Valley of the Kings. If a single night of greed ever destroyed half of your life, leave a comment. Next time, choose A, Maya human sacrifice priest, or B, a doomed Pompeii merchant. Vote in the comments. This film is a fictional dramatization for entertainment only.